from research and analysis to documentation, preservation, and dissemination. Changing conditions, approaches, and methods throughout a journey of 30 years dedicated to the study of performing arts of Braj, North India. What started as a random fieldwork project in 1994 has steadily grown into a large scale institutionalized effort for the preservation of the unique cultural heritage of an entire region. Changing perceptions and approaches determined by modified conditions surrounding the tradition under study have led to a constant redefinition of research methodology and objectives. What began as a simple task of research and analysis transformed into an enormous interdisciplinary effort encompassing almost all branches of the humanities. Whereas in 1994, the thematic scope was directed at the analytical study of the musical practice of selected Vaishnav temples and communities in Braj. Today, our thematic scope is directed at the entire sphere of Braj art and culture, including the temple, classical, folk and tribal traditions, and encompassing visual and performing arts, as well as the cultural and social context. In 1994, our academic work in Braj started with a single project with the musicological study with related inquiry into literature and religious studies, whereas at present there are multiple and interrelated projects and a comprehensive subject range covering humanities and social sciences. If we look at the geographical scope, then in 1994, our inquiry was directed at the Braj region and selected areas within India in which the Braj tradition was followed, whereas at present, our geographical scope includes the entire South Asian region as well as the Southeast Asian tradition related to ancient Indian cultural heritage. If we look at objectives, approaches, and methodology, then in 1994, the main objective was the inquiry into a selected musical tradition to ensure its analytical understanding, whereas at present, the objective is the preservation of multiple endangered art forms. In 1994, our approaches were selective and subject oriented, whereas today they are comprehensive and interdisciplinary in nature. As regards methodology, in 1994 it was research and analysis, whereas today our focus is on documentation, preservation, and dissemination. What are the reasons behind this transformation? Now let us look at four major aspects. First, the state of the traditions under study. Second, the accessibility of the traditions. Third, communication. And fourth, the aspect of technology. When the project Musical Traditions of Vaishnav Temples in Braj was initiated in January 1994, the Braj region in general and the Vaishnav temples of Vrindavan and Mathura in particular had a flourishing practice of Samaj Gayan or congregational singing, as well as daily kirtan performances, providing ample material for recording and subsequent analytical inquiry into this unique musical and literary heritage. The challenge at that time was to produce a comprehensive account of the tradition in English language so as to make the knowledge accessible to as broad a readership as possible. A task difficult to be accomplished by foreign scholars, as the research required not only a profound knowledge of the musical tradition, but also proficiency in the Braj Bhasha dialect of Hindi as the literary basis. Indian scholars possessing sufficient knowledge of both, on the other hand, preferred to publish their accounts in Hindi. Upon commencement of the second phase of the project in July 1994, some drastic changes had occurred that changed the outlook towards the Vaishnav temple music tradition of Braj and laid the foundation for the gradual shift of emphasis towards comprehensive documentation and preservation rather than mere selective research. The elderly lead singer of one of the temples with an important tradition of Samaj Gayan had suffered a stroke and was no more able to conduct the performances. Although the tradition was being upheld by two of his sons, the number of Samaj sessions had been reduced and so had been their musical quality. The daily classical Drupad singing classes under the guidance of Pandit Vidar Malik that had been in full force in the beginning of 1994 had been discontinued and the students had dispersed. In this manner, many traditions had been affected. Either some prominent member had passed away, or the participants had left Braj, or the tradition had become dormant for other reasons. The immediate question that arose at that time was as to what we would record and analyze in a few years' time if the traditions will not persist. Rather than directly investigating them, should we not first try to keep these traditions alive? Would it not be more sensitive, instead of a selective inquiry, to document the traditions on a broad scale so as to create a fair amount of archive material which may later on not only serve as a database for further research projects but also, if required, could help in reviving dormant musical practices? If a mere 4 months between March and July 1994 had been sufficient to eliminate entire traditions from the spectrum of daily devotional music in Braj, what would happen a few years onwards? In order to understand the challenge set by the seemingly straightforward answer to these questions, a closer look at the circumstances surrounding cultural research in Braj in the 1990s is necessary. In the early 1990s, Braj art and culture in general and the Vaishnav temple music traditions in particular were accessible only to those happening to be present at the time and place of a given performance. The exposure of these arts beyond their immediate liturgical context within Braj was almost non existent. And except for a few rare fieldwork recordings and photographs taken by scholars involved in research on the respective traditions, no material was available to outsiders to gain insights into the devotional arts of Braj. Communication is an essential aspect in the pursuance of fieldwork in any given area. The scholar needs to be in a position to communicate with the artists whose tradition he investigates, even when not being in the field. In Braj during the 1990s, the means of communication were limited and slow. The primary mode of communication was by post, which could take anything between a few days and a few weeks, with no guarantee that the correspondence would reach its addressee. The second common way of communication was the telephone, sinfully expensive in the case of long distance, not to mention international calls, and suffering from permanently jammed lines in the evening and at night when the call rates dropped to 1/3, respectively 1/4 of the daytime rates. Moreover, most of the temple musicians and artists living under extremely simple conditions could not afford a landline telephone of their own. The most advanced mode of communication at that time, which was available only to few, was the fax. The major aspect determining fieldwork in Braj in the 1990s is the technology available at that time to document the traditions under study. In the field of audio recording, that was the best quality option. Its disadvantages were limited recording time, leading to frequent tape changes during extended performances, as well as limited battery capacity of the DAT recorders in a fieldwork environment without reliable sources of power supply. Video recording was available but little used because of its extremely expensive equipment. As for photography, the most convenient mode was the slider reel. Again, a very costly undertaking with accumulative costs for the film roll, its processing and mounting, amounting to about 900 rupees in the mid 1990s, equivalent to about 30 US dollars for a single reel of 36 slides. Last but not least, the facilities for photocopying and reproducing text should be mentioned. In 1994, Vrindavan had two shops offering photocopy services. One of them ran on a photostat machine from the initial days of photocopying technology, which took about half an hour to reproduce a single page, whereas the other shop used a more modern machine, which was, however, out of order most of the time. Since the textbooks for Samaj singing in the Vaishnav temples were anyway only available to the performers who would not hand them over to anyone else even for a short while, the only way to note down the song texts was to copy them by hand while they were being sung. Before outlining the transformation in research concepts, approaches, and methods over the period of 30 years from 1994 to the present, which involved the shift towards large scale documentation and preservation, as well as the institutionalization of the efforts leading to the foundation of Vraja Kala Sanskriti Sansthana, the Institute of Braj Art and Culture in 2004, let us briefly compare the fieldwork conditions in the 1990s with the present day situation. For reasons that shall be explained briefly, let us look at the aspects in reverse order, beginning with the technology. Starting with audio recording, in 1994, we had the audio cassette recorders, Walkman, about 60 to 90 minutes per cassette. And the more advanced option was the DAT recorder, digital audio tape, 60 minutes. If the machine had long play mode, then 120 minutes per cassette. At present, we have digital voice recorders, digital cameras with voice recording function, and of course the smartphones and laptop. As for video recording, there were video cassettes, later on digital video tapes of about 60 minutes per cassette in 1994. And at present, of course, the digital cameras and smartphones have almost unlimited capacity of recording. Regarding photography, as already said, in 1994, we had the slide and color print reels, which each reel had about 36 images. At present, of course, we have digital cameras, smartphones, and these have a capacity of thousands of images. As for image reproduction, as I said, the photostat and photocopy were available in 1994. Now we have, besides the photocopy, still we have scan facilities and digital photography. As regards the modes of communication, in 1994, primarily we had the postal services, letters, postcards, we had the landline telephone, fax, and the telegram. At present, of course, email, SMS, messaging apps, the social media, we have mobile phones and video call and video conferencing facilities. As regards the accessibility of the traditions on site in 1994, the traditions were accessible to insiders present at the time of the performance. Outsiders were rarely present and mostly limited to research scholars investigating the respective traditions. Whereas at present, there are increasing numbers of outsiders, of outside visitors, and the gathering of people has grown to an extent that many insiders to the tradition avoid the venues amid the crowds. And if we regard accessibility through media in 1994, audio-visual material collected by research scholars as part of their fieldwork was available in limited quantity and accessible only to scholars specializing in the subject. Whereas at present, a wide range of audio and video recordings of the performing arts of the traditions of Braj is available on the internet and is available to a worldwide audience. So, for example, if we search for Samaj Gayan musical examples, videos on YouTube, we will find ample selection of videos pertaining to different Vaishnav communities available. But now let us look at the state of the traditions. Whereas on the one hand, technology, modes of communication, and the accessibility of the traditions have improved over the past 3 decades to an extent that one would not even have dared to dream of in the mid 1990s, the state of the traditions as such, on the other hand, paints a much less optimistic picture than one would presume given the technological and communicative progress over the past 30 years. Let us pick a few selected traditions. For example, Samaj Gayan, the congregational singing in the Vaishnav temples, in 1994 performed on a daily, respectively seasonal basis in numerous Vaishnav temples of Braj as well as in private homes of different Vaishnav communities. Whereas at present, daily performances are maintained only in very few temples and sanctuaries. The daily kirtan singing in 1994, it was maintained on a daily basis in several temples of the Vallabhite Vaishnav community in Mathura, Gokul, Kamwan, as well as in Vallabhite temples of Rajasthan and Gujarat. Whereas today, it is almost extinct as the next generation of musicians failed to uphold the tradition that was too demanding in terms of time and effort. Another important tradition of temple art is the tradition of Sanji or ground painting. In 1994, a flourishing practice of annual Sanji preparation had been upheld by 3 important temples in Vrindavan, whereas at present, Sanji preparation has remained a sporadic event that does no more necessarily take place every year at the time of the Sanji festival. The paradox is that today, as we have all the means and possibilities to easily and comprehensively document the traditional arts of Braj, these arts have decreased as rapidly as technology has grown and now have been pushed on the verge of extinction, a tendency that was already evident when our research projects in Braj started about 30 years ago. It is not at last the technology itself that led to the decline of living art. A trend towards replacing live performances of traditional temple music by commercial cassette recordings was already evident in the 1990s. Today, latest technology and availability of even traditional temple music recordings on the internet makes live performances almost unnecessary. As a result, the traditional arts are pushed into the background as both their demand and the number of practicing artists decrease. What was projected as a potential danger to the cultural heritage of Braj during the 1990s has now grown into a situation of serious neglect and decay. What happens when, on the one hand, the rapidly progressing technological development provides more and improved means of documentation, while on the other hand, the tradition being documented turns from a vivid living entity into a vanishing art? Where does the scholar set his priorities in such a situation, and in what manner can academic research help bringing an endangered tradition back to life? The following decade-wise overview over our research and documentation activities in Braj and beyond, starting with an individual assignment in 1994 and projecting the entire timeline of academic efforts and their institutionalized continuation to the present, may help to find an answer to these questions. To look at the conditions, starting with the technology in the 1990s, we had digital audio recording and slide photography available. Then in the 2000s, introduction of digital videotapes, and in addition to that and slide photography, in the 2010s there was a shift towards SD cards and digital photography, digital video recording, and that recording was discontinued. At present we have digital photography, videography, and audio recording through digital camera and smartphone. Regarding communication in the 1990s, we had the postal correspondence, landline telephony, and fax. In the 2000s, introduction of mobile phone and email communication. 2010s, we had the introduction of smartphone, video calling facilities, and social media. And at present, of course, comprehensive means for online communication. Looking at the accessibility of traditions in the 1990s, they were accessible only to those present during the live performance. 2000s, there was a limited exposure through media reports and public presentations of documented material. Then during the 2010s, of course, audiovisual material became shared on the internet and through social media, and there came the facilities to live stream performances as well. And now, of course, audiovisual material is widely available on the internet. Now, coming to the state of the traditions, in the 1990s, there was a wide spectrum of living devotional art forms in Braj. During the 2000s, there was a decrease in both spectrum and a number of living traditions. During the 2010s, the numerous traditional art forms, branches, and living practices had become dormant or discontinued, and at present there are only few art traditions that are left with an unbroken continuity. Changing conditions, of course, led to a change in objectives. During the 1990s, main objective was analytical inquiry into a given tradition to ensure its understanding. During the 2000s, we started an extensive documentation along with an analytical research, and at the same time efforts for the preservation and the revival of endangered art traditions. Again, during the 2010s, the focus was on documentation, preservation, and also dissemination, along with the continuing efforts for the revival and continuation of endangered traditions. And at present, our focus is still on documentation, preservation, and dissemination. As for the approaches, whereas during the 1990s, a subject-oriented approach was followed, but of course, considering all subjects involved in the respective project, such as music, literature, philosophy, and others, during the 2000s, on a large scale started interdisciplinary approach, including performing and visual arts. And since the 2010s to the present, we are following a broad interdisciplinary approach. This, of course, led to a shift in the scope, thematic scope. In the 1990s, it was the performing arts, 2000s, performing and visual arts, and since the 2010s to the present, a comprehensive interdisciplinary approach encompassing humanities and social science. And regarding subject wise, if we look at it, in the 1990s, it was mainly music, literature, and philosophy. Then 2000s we had music and the fine arts, literature, philosophy, and history. And after 2010s, then comprehensive interdisciplinary approach encompassing all the subject of humanities and social science. Geographically, whereas in the 1990s, our main area of study was Braj and related traditions in Rajasthan and Gujarat. Moreover, the Madhvite Vaishnav tradition of Karnataka and the Vaishnav tradition of Bengal. From the 2000s onwards, our research started including art traditions from any other part of India as well. And then later on, 2010 onwards to the present, our research includes ancient Indian heritage in related regions of South and Southeast Asia as well. Now let us look at the academic activities and their results. In the 1990s, our focus was on individual research projects on the performing arts, resulting in the publication of several monographs and numerous articles on the performing art traditions and related subjects. The same type of research and publication of monographs and articles continued through the 2000s until 2005. An important milestone during the 2000s was the establishment of Vraja Kala Sanskriti Sansthana in 2004. At the same time, together with the foundation of the institute, started the efforts for the revival of selected art forms within Braj. Thus, during the autumn of 2004, Vraja Kala Sanskriti Sansthana and its affiliated scholars and artists revived the then dormant Sanji tradition at the temple of Sri Radharaman in Vrindavan. From 2005 onwards, there were comprehensive documentation projects and followed by dissemination projects in India and abroad starting around 2006, and complemented by lectures and dissemination projects, workshops, and exhibitions of traditional art in India and abroad. During the 2010s, Vraja Kala Sanskriti Sansthana continued its comprehensive documentation projects as well as preservation and revival efforts, and of course the dissemination projects on the national and international level. An important aspect to be mentioned that from about the 2010s onwards, Vraja Kala Sanskriti Sansthana introduced the entire new generation into the practice of traditional arts, mainly the children of the affiliated scholars and artists themselves were being introduced into these art forms. More recently, during the 2020s, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic, Vraja Kala Sanskriti Sansthana supported actively the traditional art exponents, artists being especially hard hit by the pandemic, and academic dissemination activities continued through online presentations and projects. Since 2021, Vraja Kala Sanskriti Sansthana is in the process of establishing its Bundelkhand branch at Khajuraho in Madhya Pradesh, which is an important historical site at the heart of India. We have seen the circumstances that led to the shift of focus from research and analysis to documentation, preservation, and dissemination. We have also noted that preservation becomes imperative and acts as a prerequisite for research wherever a tradition is threatened by extinction. For this reason, the academic activities by Vraja Kala Sanskriti Sansthana and its affiliated scholars have experienced a shift from pure research towards an integrated approach that gives priority to revival and preservation along with the classical tasks of research and analysis. The journey of Vraja Kala Sanskriti Sansthana, the Institute of Vraj Art and Culture, has progressed over the past 20 years, preceded by 10 years of non-institutionalized individual research and documentation that came to form the Institute's archival basis. Throughout these 30 years of academic efforts, much has been achieved, some things did not materialize, and many more tasks are yet to be accomplished. While on the one hand, numerous proposed research projects of the 1990s and early 2000s are still pending or in progress, on the other hand, revival and documentation projects advanced in their place have led to the recovery and stabilization of endangered traditions that might otherwise have disappeared by now. While on the one hand, the amount of monographs and academic writings presenting outcome of research and analysis has drastically declined since 2005, on the other hand, an entire new generation of youngsters born during the 2000s have been introduced to and trained in art traditions such as classical and devotional music, Sanji art, and devotional theatre, and they are now ready to carry on those traditions over the next few decades. At the time of its foundation, Vraja Kala Sanskriti Sansthana had stated in its aims and objectives that the institute, I quote, is open to all scholars and students wishing to become immersed in the study of Vraj art and culture. With establishment of Vraja Kala Sanskriti Sansthana, it is intended to create a place of learning and a source of knowledge for Vraj scholars from all parts of the world. Visiting scholars shall be offered assistance in their fieldwork. Students may find academic guidance by the members of the institute. Vraja Kala Sanskriti Sansthana shall provide facilities for fieldwork and desk work, the latter including a library and an audiovisual archive. 20 years on, Vraja Kala Sanskriti Sansthana has not only created extensive audiovisual resources along with a significant amount of academic writings, but looks back at a long list of scholars and students who have received academic guidance and fieldwork assistance by the scholars and artists affiliated to the institute. What did not materialize over those years is the facilities to make its resources available to research scholars in a proper manner, as the institute still functions from the private premises of its founder members as it did at the time of its establishment in 2004. The main reason for this deficiency is shortage of funding, in the light of which priorities had to be set and financial means were utilized primarily for the upkeep and the revival of endangered traditions, and especially during the COVID pandemic for the support of the hard-hit representatives of those traditions. The institute functions on a voluntary basis. Its activities are funded exclusively from private resources of its founder members, complemented by occasional project grants and donations. The Institute of Vraj Art and Culture welcomes anyone interested in its efforts. Academics, students, and research scholars will be readily supported at any time, be it with theoretical guidance or practical fieldwork assistance.